Archive 1877, the signal everyone heard. Former classification, restricted. Pre-FTL Cultural Containment Division. There are countless mysteries associated with humanity. Some eventually receive an explanation. Others simply fade away as public interest moves on to newer mysteries. And then there are the rare cases that refuse to cooperate. Cases that remain unresolved not because of a lack of effort, but because reality itself declines to provide an answer. Among the thousands of archives I reviewed during my career, only a handful carried the designation unresolved. Archive 1877 was one of them. Humans know it by a much simpler name: the WOW signal. If you are unfamiliar with the event, it occurred in August of 1977. An astronomer working with a radio telescope detected an unusually strong, narrowband radio signal that appeared to originate somewhere in the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. The transmission lasted only 72 seconds. It was never detected again. While reviewing the computer printout, the astronomer circled the most unusual sequence of characters and wrote a single word beside it. Well, the name remained. As names go, it was surprisingly efficient. Much better than the designation our documentation department initially assigned to it. I believe it was Transient Electromagnetic Event 44C, Appendix 7, Revision 3. Nobody outside documentation ever used that title. Despite what many humans assumed afterward, the signal was not ignored. Quite the opposite. Observatories around the world searched for it again. New equipment was built. Old recordings were re-examined. Researchers proposed explanations ranging from natural astrophysical phenomena to distant extraterrestrial transmitters. Nothing fit perfectly, and eventually, nothing else happened. For humanity, the case became another unsolved mystery. For us, it became something considerably more complicated. You see, Earth was not the first civilization to receive that signal. Nor was it the last. The first report we knew of came from a civilization nearly 30,000 of your years before humans developed agriculture. Their astronomers recorded an identical event. Different instruments, different sky, different era, same characteristics. A brief narrowband transmission. No repetition. No identifiable source. No explanation. They named it Observation Kappa 19. Their scientists debated it for 2 centuries before reluctantly classifying it as currently inexplicable. Several millennia later, another civilization detected what appeared to be the same phenomenon. Their translation would be something like the whisper between stars. They considered it a religious omen. Our cultural analysis department spent almost 80 years persuading their governments not to build a civilization-wide philosophy around a 72-second radio anomaly. According to the final report, the intervention was only partially successful. Later came another civilization, then another's, and another's. Each believed they had witnessed something unique. Each assumed they might have intercepted the first message from another intelligent species. Each waited for a second transmission. None ever received one. The names varied considerably. The Silent Beacon, Transient 602, Event Sigma. Unknown Carrier. One civilization used a designation that translated roughly as probably nothing. Their scientists turned out to be among the wisest we ever encountered. By the time humanity received its own 72 seconds of mystery, the Galactic Union had already accumulated records from dozens of independent civilizations spread across different regions of the galaxy. Different histories, different technologies, different biology, different cultures, exactly the same question. What was it? Naturally, the existence of multiple detections transformed the matter from an astronomical curiosity into an official investigation. The responsibility fell, as so many inconvenient responsibilities eventually did to the Pre-FTL Cultural Containment Division. I remember the meeting well. Someone from Central Administration confidently announced that the mystery would likely be resolved within a few months. The room became unusually quiet. Veteran investigators exchanged the kind of glance that only experienced civil servants understand. It was the look that says someone has just promised a schedule without consulting the people expected to do the work. The investigation officially began 3 days later. It remained open for another 412 years. Part 2. 412 years of not knowing. There is a common misconception among young civilizations. They tend to believe that sufficiently advanced technology eventually becomes indistinguishable from certainty. It does not. It merely allows one to eliminate incorrect explanations much faster. The investigation into Archive 1877 began with remarkable optimism. The Galactic Union assembled specialists from virtually every scientific discipline: astrophysicists, communication engineers, signal analysts, relativistic physicists, exolinguists, artificial intelligence experts, historians, even philosophers. The philosophers insisted they had been invited. The attendance records suggest otherwise. The first task was obvious: determine whether every recorded event was actually the same phenomenon. That alone required nearly 40 years. Signals separated by tens of thousands of years had to be reconstructed from ancient archives, obsolete recording media, handwritten observatory logs, and in one memorable case, ceramic tablets designed to survive the collapse of an entire civilization. The preservation department deserved considerable praise for that one. They had preserved everything except a proper indexing system. Eventually, the comparison was complete. The conclusion surprised no one. Every civilization had recorded a signal sharing the same essential characteristics: exceptionally narrow, exceptionally clean, extremely short, never repeated, no detectable modulation carrying recognizable information, no measurable degradation that would suggest ordinary interstellar scattering. It was almost too perfect. That was when the arguments began. The Astrophysics Committee proposed that the source was an unknown natural phenomenon. Perhaps an exotic stellar collapse. Perhaps a magnetized compact object. Perhaps an interaction between dark matter structures that no existing theory had predicted. The Mathematics Committee responded with a report spanning 800 pages. Their conclusion occupied a single sentence: the probability of all observations matching a natural source under current models is unsatisfying. Mathematicians have a remarkable ability to express profound uncertainty with exceptional confidence. The Communications Bureau proposed another explanation: an ancient automated beacon, perhaps millions of years old, perhaps abandoned by a civilization long extinct. It was a reasonable hypothesis, until engineers calculated the required energy budget. The beacon would have needed to remain operational for periods exceeding the lifetimes of most stars, while transmitting exactly once to each observing civilization. Funding for that theory quietly disappeared. The Archaeological Survey preferred a different possibility. Perhaps every recorded signal originated from different civilizations. Independent experiments, independent transmitters, independent accidents, an astonishing coincidence. After 3 decades of analysis, they reluctantly admitted that the coincidence required was statistically more extraordinary than the signal itself. The proposal was archived, then reopened, then archived again. Administrative consistency is an aspiration rather than an achievement. The Military Analysis Directorate approached the matter from an entirely different perspective. If someone intentionally transmitted the signal, why only once? Why 72 seconds? Why no message? Why no repetition? Why no observable destination? Several admirals became convinced that the transmission represented a reconnaissance technique. No evidence supported this conclusion. Military organizations occasionally regard evidence as an optional administrative enhancement. Fortunately, civilian oversight remained effective. Most of the time, one particularly ambitious research group attempted to map every known detection onto a galactic timeline. Their expectation was straightforward. Surely a pattern would emerge. It did. Unfortunately, it was not one anyone could explain. The signal never appeared simultaneously. There was always only one recorded recipient. One civilization. One observatory. One brief detection. Then silence. Thousands of years later, another civilization. Different location. Different era. Different region of the galaxy. The implications were deeply uncomfortable. If the signal originated from a fixed point in space, the timing made no sense. If it originated from moving objects, the trajectories made no sense. If it was random, it was the most disciplined form of randomness ever documented. That discovery prompted the largest investigation in the history of the Union. Thousands of observatories coordinated continuous monitoring. Entire constellations of autonomous listening stations were deployed. Several governments redirected scientific budgets for decades. The amount of collected data became so enormous that a dedicated archival moon had to be commissioned simply to store observations that contained absolutely nothing. It became known unofficially as the Quiet Moon. An unfortunate name. The moon itself generated quite a lot of administrative noise. Every few decades, another committee declared the mystery essentially solved. Every time, another committee demonstrated precisely why it was not. Committee 7 rejected Committee 4's cosmological interpretation. Committee 4 appealed. Committee 12 rejected the appeal because Committee 7 had used an outdated procedural format. The scientific disagreement remained unresolved. The paperwork did not. It eventually exceeded 14 million pages. The record still stands. One investigation produced a particularly unsettling discovery. Union historians searched the oldest surviving archives ever recovered. Not merely ancient by human standards, ancient by galactic standards. Among the records was the scientific log of a civilization that had flourished before many current member species had even evolved multicellular life. Their observatories had detected the same signal. Their instrumentation surpassed anything the modern Union could construct. Their understanding of physics bordered on incomprehensible. Surely they had solved it. The recovered archive contained only 3 entries. Observation confirmed. Source unknown. Further investigation recommended. There was no 4th entry. No final report. No solution. Nothing. For the first time in centuries, the investigation slowed. Not because enthusiasm had diminished, but because everyone involved reached the same uncomfortable realization. If a civilization that advanced had failed, perhaps the problem was not insufficient technology. Perhaps the universe was asking a question before revealing the language in which it could be answered. No scientist enjoys reaching that conclusion. No bureaucrat enjoys filing it. Nevertheless, that was exactly what happened. Part 3. The shelf marked unknown. After 412 years, the investigation had accumulated enough material to occupy 3 orbital archives, 2 research stations, and an amount of administrative paperwork that even our documentation department considered excessive. No conclusion had survived peer review. No hypothesis had resisted new evidence. No explanation successfully accounted for every observation. The universe, it seemed, had declined to participate in the investigation. Eventually, the inevitable meeting was scheduled. Not because someone had solved the mystery, because the Budget Committee had noticed that Archive 1877 had remained active for over 4 centuries. No bureaucracy, regardless of how advanced, can ignore an open expense account forever. Representatives from every department attended. The Astrophysics Committee recommended extending the investigation. The Communications Bureau requested another century of continuous monitoring. The Military Directorate suggested classifying the signal until it could somehow become less mysterious. The Documentation Department proposed dividing the archive into 17 independent subcases. Fortunately, no one supported that proposal. After 3 days of discussion, a compromise was reached. The investigation would no longer be classified as an active inquiry. Instead, it would become a permanent observation file. In practical terms, that meant the case was never considered solved, but no one was assigned to work on it full-time anymore. Every observatory in the Union would continue listening. Every unusual detection would be compared against Archive 1877. Every few decades, a young researcher would become convinced they had finally found the answer. Every few decades, they would discover that several generations of equally enthusiastic researchers had reached exactly the same conclusion before them. Scientific progress is often described as standing on the shoulders of giants. Bureaucratic progress is more accurately described as standing on carefully indexed shelves. I attended the final meeting. As everyone prepared to leave, the Director of Scientific Coordination looked around the room and asked one last question. So, what exactly do we tell future civilizations if they detect it? For a moment, no one spoke. Then an elderly archivist, who had spent nearly half his career organizing the reports from this investigation, closed his tablet and answered quietly. The truth. The director nodded. And what is the truth? The archivist adjusted his glasses. We do not know. No one objected. It was, by unanimous agreement, the most accurate statement produced during the entire investigation. Years later, after my retirement, I was invited to lecture at the Union Academy. Young field observers always ask the same questions. They want stories about famous civilizations, ancient ruins, first contacts, impossible technologies. One student eventually raised a hand. Sir, do you personally believe the WOW signal was an alien transmission? The room became very quiet. I answered exactly as I always do. Of course. Several students immediately began taking notes. One of them smiled, convinced he had finally obtained the answer that 4 centuries of investigators had failed to produce. Then he asked the obvious follow-up. So who sent it? I shrugged. I have absolutely no idea. The room looked disappointed. I never understood why. The signal certainly came from somewhere. That much was obvious. Whether it was sent intentionally, whether it was natural, whether it originated from intelligence beyond our current understanding, or whether it belonged to some entirely different category of phenomenon remains unknown. Experience has taught me that advanced civilizations possess many remarkable things. Better telescopes, better mathematics, better spacecraft, longer histories. What experience does not automatically provide are all the answers. During your civilization's early years, many humans imagined that somewhere among the stars existed a species that understood every mystery. I regret to inform you that such a place does exist. It is called the Galactic Union Scientific Archive. It contains the accumulated knowledge of thousands of civilizations across millions of years. It is, without question, the greatest library ever assembled. And one of its oldest shelves bears a simple label. Unknown, Archive 1877 remains there. The observatories continue listening. Occasionally, another civilization detects 72 seconds of impossible certainty followed by immeasurable silence. They celebrate, they speculate, they investigate. Eventually, if they remain curious long enough, they discover our reports. Then they add their own. Perhaps one day, someone will find the missing piece that all of us overlooked. I hope they do. Not because it would finally solve one of the oldest mysteries in the archives, but because, after all these centuries, it would save future archivists an extraordinary amount of paperwork. End of Archive 1877. Current classification, permanent observation. Status unresolved.